Welcome to the Module 3 commentary video, Making Retention Decisions for LIS 886. Before we begin, please take a moment to adjust your video and sound setting for optimal viewing quality of this video. If you encounter any difficulties viewing this video, please contact me as soon as possible. Prior to viewing this video for Module 3, please read Chapter 3 in the Safety textbook, pages 59 to 98. Also, please read the handout on Canvas called A New Game Plan for Building a Retention Strategy That Works by Lori Luig. Directions on where to locate the handout will be available to you, for you, and with you, I suppose, in the Module 3 to-do list posted on Canvas. Welcome to the part of RIM that guides every major decision about your RIM program, the Records Retention Schedule. In a nutshell, the Records Retention Schedule takes the results of your records inventory and assigns crucial data points to describe the record and its significance to your organization. These data points can be, but are not limited to, description of the record, name of the record series, retention period and time, action to be taken when the retention period has expired, and the retention event. In other words, the Records Retention Schedule gives you everything you'd like to know about records but were perhaps afraid to ask. We'll explore the wonderful world of the law and how it drives almost everything we do in RIM as a professional later on in our presentation. Since it's the 21st century, I'll spend some time discussing the importance of records retention schedules on electronic records. Finally, I'll give you a few examples of records retention schedules in action so you can translate theory into practice. This commentary is meaty, so grab a cup of coffee and a scone, perhaps a glass of wine, maybe your cat or dog, and let's get comfortable. Let's spend some time discussing the basics of records retention schedules. Since the records retention schedule is so crucial to the success of a RIM program, be sure you thoroughly understand the spirit behind the elements which constitute the document. RIM is definitely not rocket science, but as you saw in the text, your organization can get into pretty big trouble if mandatory retention periods are ignored or maliciously averted. Let me first take a moment and give you the official definition of a records retention schedule. You can read, so I will not insult your intelligence. Just know the records retention schedule is a list. Yeah, that's really the records retention schedule in a nutshell. You will find the records retention schedule can be developed for a particular program unit, the whole organization, or some hybrid fashion. In real practice, you will find organizations of all sizes likely have a functional retention schedule, also maybe called a master schedule. How the organization breaks up or parses out the schedule from there depends on the political needs of the group, but you will usually find a master document somewhere listing all of the record series. The records retention schedule is the end product of the records inventory, in that you can assign retention periods to record series if you don't know what record series you have. Oh my God, how simple. So, as with most things RIM, there is a logical progression throughout your work as a professional in this field. As I'm sure you guessed, there can be multiple flavors of the records retention schedule in RIM practice. The three most common types are program-specific records retention schedules, functional records retention schedules, and hybrid records retention schedules. Let's take a moment to unpack these three types in detail. For starters, a program-specific records retention schedule, otherwise known as an activity-oriented or department records retention schedule, is found in and relates to a particular program unit. For example, the records management department of an organization may have record series such as records disposal certificates, official changes to the schedule, or other legal hold notices. On a program-specific records retention schedule, only these items would appear. In the functional records retention schedule, you will find all documents which relate to a particular organizational function across departments which may have a piece of the puzzle. For example, accounts payable documents in the forms of invoices, reimbursement requests, receipts, and other such items may be found in multiple departments, but listed as a single record series in the functional records retention schedule, showing the units which may be the owner of the document. Finally, a hybrid version of the records retention schedule can also exist at an organization. As with most hybrids, The best of both programmatical and functional records retention schedules may be found in an organization. Let's take a deeper dive into program-specific records retention schedules. For example, the Human Resources Department and a library may have items such as resumes, applications, Form I-9s, and the such. If the HR department decided to create a program-specific records retention schedule, the document would contain only those items found in the ownership of Human Resources. Nowhere on the document would you find items related to procurement, building operations, or perhaps the archives. As you can tell, this type of records retention schedule is highly specific and to the point. Proponents of the program-specific records retention schedule state this type is easily understood and well received within the department. Since it's limited to one program unit, little confusion is typically encountered in its translation. Let's take a moment to further look into a functional records retention schedule. At my organization, the Master University Records Retention Schedule is functional, listing all types of records across the organization. Instead of having separate program unit records retention schedules for places such as HR and admissions, these departments simply look up their records on the functional records retention schedule. These types of schedules can be quite easy to adapt from one organization to another and are pretty easy when speaking about multinational companies and applying them across the different corporations in the units in different countries. However, these schedules can be rather clunky in nature because they're so large. Also, end users might get lost in the weeds of other program units' record series and have trouble finding their own. Keep in mind, anytime you make it too difficult for a program unit to find what they need, you run the risk of frustration and non-compliance. As much as I love our functional records retention schedule at DePaul, I do frequently get questions and complaints about the inability to find necessary record series on the master schedule. So keep in mind, even though you may think it works well as a RIM professional, and likely will do it in the future, develop one of those that is, you'll probably hear people complain about difficulty in finding records, so just know it's a trade-off. A few minutes ago, I spoke of specific program units owning records. In a more formal fashion, let me pause for a moment to speak of what Safety calls the Office of Record. Let's say you work for an organization with a central HR department and you work in the archives. When a new digital archivist is hired, he or she must fill out pertinent information related to human resources functions, such as the applications, government tax forms, and payroll authorization forms. Then, you as the unit supervisor may decide to keep your own personal file, which may not necessarily be sent back to human resources for storage. If your organization deploys a functional retention schedule, you might find items from the time of hire, the application and such, and all those different other things reside in a central human resources file. In RIM speak, HR would be the office of record for these documents. The records retention schedule may then state any document created beyond the initial HR file that has employment-related materials may be kept in the individual unit. In this example, the file found in the archives is owned or recorded in the archives. With this framework, just know if a copy of a record that is held outside of the organization's office of record, those items being, maybe copies of the original employment application and such, just know that those are copies or unofficial record. In my organization, we advise individual program units not to possess copies of confidential forms such as I-9s because not only do those forms have a person's social security number on them, but the original record is held in HR and is easily retrievable if the particular unit needs to see a copy of it. In other words, in an office environment such as procurement, they have no business having a copy of an employment I-9 because the owner or the office of record, in the case of this organization, would be human resources. At this juncture, human behavior starts to rear its ugly head because many times you'll find as a RIM professional that non-office of record folks have one or more copies of records which really are to be held in a different office. So just know you're going to see this more often than not, and it's always helpful to remind folks in program units of who actually is the office of record of the document that they may have in front of them. If you're lucky enough to get them to shred them or get rid of those documents, you've made major strides in managing your RIM program. All right, here is an example of a program-specific records retention schedule at my organization. Don't worry, all of this information is public, so I'm not giving you any trade secrets here. This office, a unit which manages immigration documents for students, has a whole slew of documents, as you can see on your screen. To make it easier for this office, I, as the RIM professional, created this list and mapped it back to our master functional retention schedule. Though you'll notice these documents all have the same record series number, records retention period, event, and action, it was easier for the program unit to know which specific documents were in their custody that they needed and what needed to be done when basically those documents met the end of their retention period. You'll also notice in maroon several columns of data. These map to ImageNow, which is our electronic records management system. I'll speak more about metadata and how to map that further along in the course when we discuss technology. Basically, what I want you to get from this screen is on a functional records retention schedule, you're really going to find it to where they're not specific names of document types, as you can see on the screen right here. You're never going to go onto a master records retention schedule and see something called a comment sheet. That probably rolls up into something different, maybe a broader category on that master schedule. However, a lot of units, in helping them comply with the concept of RIM, you're going to want to break it down a little bit further for them, and that's where the program-specific records retention schedule really is helpful. And here's an example of a functional records retention schedule. This is one subset of my organization's schedule in all its beauty. In this example, you'll see several types of student records are listed with various responsible departments, otherwise known as the Office of Record, various retention periods, events, actions, and the retention authority. This type of schedule is easy to create, but you'll notice it's built vague by design. I've heard some program units complain it's hard to find their particular record because the name of the form that they look at on a daily basis is not listed. If you recall my previous example, the unit could easily look and see a Form I-20 had to be destroyed in 5 years. So, as a RIM professional, you'll have to adapt it to the needs of your organization. In practice, I'll tell you it's easier to use a hybrid method or having one master schedule and multiple program unit specific ones to help folks translate what needs to be done and to keep up to their responsibility when it comes to records management. When it comes to records retention schedules, probably the largest consideration when it comes to assigning retention periods and actions would be the law. Unless you would like my fabulous friend, well, not really, I just wish she was my friend, Judge Judy, to be screaming at you in court, we probably should discuss some of the major legal implications when it comes to RIM. So, put on your black robe, pretend like a judge, and let's dive in. According to Safety, and probably any RIM professional worth their weight, there are 5 general reasons why records must be retained for a specific period of time, or permanently in some cases. First, and most importantly, the law probably tells you you need to keep some records. It could be the federal law, state or local ordinances, or perhaps maybe some multi-country entity if you operate on that scale. Regardless of who's telling you to do it, make sure you listen, lest you enjoy costly litigation and bad press. Another big reason to keep records is for operational purposes. In other words, you may have to keep the records to document your business. Also, you may need them for administrative reasons. Perhaps you're attempting to document the minutes of a meeting or decisions made on a particular case. That could be a reason why. Also, you may need to keep the record for scholarly purposes. For this reason, I frequently call upon my friends in the archives. Oftentimes, when a record such as meeting minutes or promotional flyers have met the end of their operational records retention requirements, the archives loves to accession the documents to have them as a history of the institution. Finally, and probably the one that befuddles most RIM professionals, but is so real I can't stress it enough, is political. There may be no law, no real administrative or operational need. Heck, even the archives doesn't care. However, the CEO might want to keep the document for 20 years. And because you value a paycheck, you will keep the items, no questions asked. Political reasons can be the most frustrating and probably the most illogical, but the reality is they're all over our field and you need to be prepared for that in making records retention schedules. So you're tossed into the proverbial RIM shark tank. How the heck will you, as a new RIM professional, get into a new organization and figure out what needs to stay and why? Think back to our last module. Maybe your company has decided to vertically integrate and purchase the company which supplies your products. You don't need an MBA to know what that means, just know maybe you're going to purchase a company which has nothing to do with your current line of business. You as the RIM manager may be successful at what you do, but now you have to deal with records which are from a different company and are totally unlike yours, and maybe, frankly, you find that line of work boring. The very first thing I would do is identify your industry and see what laws apply. If you're in banking, finance, medical, or something like that, you probably have a whole slew of clearly ascribed rules. In not-for-profits and education, especially if you're talking private, it can be pretty much anything goes. On one hand, having rules can be restrictive and also a pain, but at least you have rules. In private organizations, you typically have few rules to follow, which may be really nice. However, when it comes time to making the rules, you're often relying upon folks who are hell-bent on keeping items for much longer than needed. And since you don't have the president and his cabinet telling you what to do, you don't have much leverage in attempting to change their minds. So, in a nutshell, make sure you research all the federal, state, and local rules which may apply to your industry. A quick Google search or a trip to the local library may help you in pointing you in the right direction. Next, hire or get access to a lawyer. Why? Well, those are the folks who will likely represent you if a case goes to litigation, and they'll know or have access to documentation that can help you find things that you can't get on the good old interwebs. It might be helpful also to have a SME, otherwise known as a subject matter expert from your organization, come with you to meet with the lawyers. For example, I know very little about financial aid, so when there's a question about how long to keep a financial aid document, I schedule a meeting with our lawyers and the director of financial aid. Between the two of them, usually a question can be resolved. As the RIM manager, you are not at all required to know the answers to everything. You are merely the facilitator of this process and are there to document the findings and help enforce them in the organization. Speaking of documentation, do it often. When you find the statute which drives your records retention period for a particular series, write it down. Bookmark the websites, print out a copy of the ordinance, whatever it takes. Just make sure you can always show the lawyers where you found the rule. Speaking of litigation, I hope you never get called down to the loop for a trial. However, just know a record is considered admissible in court if two considerations are met. The content of the record is relevant and the authenticity can be established. So, when the subpoena arrives and you're asked to cough up files, just know lawyers will probably tell you what is considered relevant. The courts do not expect you, the RIM manager, to know if the content in your records would be relevant to the case. You're not a legal scholar after all. However, you will be responsible for proving that the record is authentic. When it's on paper, it's pretty easy. Does it look altered? Did it need a signature? Altering paper isn't the easiest thing to do. Just remember back when you tried to forge your parent's signature in elementary school. You always got caught, right? Establishing authenticity of paper records is pretty easy. However, electronic records make it a bit more dicey to prove the authenticity, but it's not impossible, so don't get worried about it. It's likely records bound for court will be coming from your electronic records management system or your network drive spaces. Not sure what these are? Stay tuned. However, let's talk about electronic records management systems for a second. Most sophisticated systems have something called a database log, or the running commentary in the back of the system which tracks everybody's moves. You'll likely need to have this pulled in order to prove nothing in the system was tampered with. If you work at an organization with such a system, find out who runs it and talk to them about the database log. How can you get a copy of the activity? Is it erased after a certain point? How long would it take to get a copy if you have lawyers banging at your door saying they need them? Next, you'll probably need to run over training materials and other documentation to show how users enter and manage documents in the system. If you're not showing users how to effectively use an electronic records management system, that could show negligence on your organization's behalf. Also, make sure that only the right subset of folks have access to your records management system. The last thing you need is the summer intern messing around with those financial records in the system. Also, if you have security camera footage or other things proving that records are created or destroyed in a legal defensible manner, be sure to cough those up too if requested. All of these elements combined show how you acted in good faith, and it's oh so important in litigious situations. As you've probably figured out, most records are kept just long enough to satisfy your state, federal, or local statutes and limitations and then pitched. So what are the statute of limitations for your line of work? Well, again, the lawyers will likely tell you. It varies from record series to record series, so just rely upon those hired experts to help you out and tell you what to do. What if you don't have access to legal counsel? Well, then I'd probably reach out to colleagues who do similar work, maybe at different companies, and see what they're up to. Alright, the moment of truth has arrived. You're in litigation. The first thing to do is to stay calm. Most lawsuits don't even make it to court since, again, folks can sue for anything. However, litigation can be very costly, so be sure to comply with whatever the court or opposing counsel is asking for in terms of documentation. Be sure to clearly ask which records need to be turned over, from what time frames, who needs to produce them at the organization, and so on. Be sure you keep thorough documentation of any interactions with outside lawyers and even anyone in your own firm when it comes to court cases. Usually, litigation is the litmus test of your firm, and again, how well you've been managing records. In other words, don't get caught behind the 8-ball. Any little steps you can take to document procedures and policies and audit your program early and often can help when you're called in front of Judge Judy. The reality, your career could be dependent on how well you can produce records and keep them organized, so just keep that in mind in your day-to-day work. One of the most useful documents when it comes to litigation is the legal hold notice. For example, when my organization becomes party to a suit, our Office of General Counsel, which are our lawyers, sends out a legal hold to anyone and everyone who potentially could be involved in a lawsuit. The legal hold briefly describes the case and gives next steps to those involved. In all legal hold situations at my organization, the retention rules for any record as a part of the lawsuit are immediately suspended. In other words, if a client from 6 years ago sues you and their records are set to be deleted or destroyed next week in response to your legally defensive records retention rules, do not destroy them. In fact, you could be in huge trouble for doing so because it looks like you're trying to hide something. So, as the records manager, be sure you know which records are currently subject to litigation and make sure your records coordinators know they can't destroy them if they're under legal hold or lest face Judge Judy's wrath. Before we wrap up this commentary video, let's turn for a moment and discuss some housekeeping elements when it comes to records retention schedules. A few helpful items listed on the screen will guide your retention of records. First and foremost, ditch without question any drafts of memos or correspondence which culminate into a final draft. In other words, if you click into your Network Drive folder and find the final copy of a report along with 6 drafts dated different dates, get rid of the drafts. You can always do this because those 6 drafts combine forces to make the final copy. Anything in the final copy that could be found in those drafts, you don't need. Basically, you don't need the pieces that made it up. So, don't keep the drafts. Also, imagine for a second emailing that final draft to the printer for publication. You can delete the email and the attachment that went to the printer right away. This is because the official record that you attached is stored elsewhere and the attachment is just unofficial. Also, junk mail. It's annoying and no one likes it. Feel free to immediately delete the email from the Sultan of France asking you for him to wire money to your cousin. The same goes for emails complimenting your good work. Unless they give you warm fuzzies, Judge Judy couldn't care less, and she probably doesn't want to see them. So, unless you're including these as a part of someone's performance file, get rid of things which have no relevance to the business. One final thing. If you have an electronic record, be sure to migrate it from time to time. For example, if you have an official record data in an Excel workbook created in 1997, periodically open that file and convert it to a later file type. There will come a time when files corrupt and can no longer be opened. Just because you didn't keep up on migration, that isn't an excuse when you face litigation. As the records manager, you need to include this public service announcement as a part of your overall RIM training program. Okay, assuming you have records which need to be destroyed and are not subject to litigation hold, by all means get rid of them. But before you do, be sure to have a records disposal certificate filled out and signed. I've included on Canvas a copy of DePaul's records disposal certificate, which must be filled out before a record is destroyed. Essentially, this document is a receipt and blessing to destroy, signed by not only records management, the records coordinator, but also our internal lawyers. It's a vital document when you have to prove how a record was destroyed. This document can be your lifesaver in court, so make sure you always hold on to them. And now, a shout out to my friends in the archives. You also want to have documentation which shows when records were sessioned by the archives. I've included a copy of this form as well on Canvas, which is in use of my organization. Well, if you're not already in the fetal position out of fear of Judge Judy, let's explore one more slide which will show you the very least you need to know about records retention schedules. So here's the process again. First, do a records inventory to see what you have at the firm. Next, find a lawyer and clue them in as to what you found. If you don't have access to a lawyer, find a colleague in a similar industry and role and talk it over with them. Next, determine the legal requirements of the found record series and document the heck out of what you find. When you're done with the law, turn inward and see if you need to add any retention period time based on operational needs. Once all the footwork is done, set the retention rules and create the appropriate records retention schedule. Then, when it's all done, distribute it to everyone at your firm and keep them apprised of updates. While this is grossly simplified, this is the process you need to commit to practice and to your memory. It's not a horrible process and is actually quite interesting for geeks like me who enjoy the historical background and knowing why things need to be kept. But again, this very simplified 6-step process will help you at least get your foot in the door and know how to create a records retention schedule. You made it to the end. This concludes the Module 3 commentary on making retention decisions. If you have any questions or would like more information on elements found in the commentary, please do not hesitate to email me or reach out to me directly for more discussion. Thank you, and see you next week.